So hello everyone. I went through the Istio control changes today and last week for the 1.2. I signed up for Istio control testing. The way that I normally test is to run every single command Istio control offers. But I noticed that although they mostly work, I found some defects and fixed them. We didn't have any docs or some blog articles for some of the new features of Istio control. Ram was surprised to see experimental dashboard, this way to bring up Kiali and the various dashboards. So we should probably try to target some kind of documents to highlight our new features.
Right. I mean, if it works, then I don't see any reason why it can't be added to the docs, right?
We definitely want to add to the docs. Most of the Istio controls commands are only shown in terms of how to use them to do the tasks of the journeys. We don't highlight.
That's what I mean. Inside the task, like in the Kiali task, for example.
Yeah. So instead of all that stuff about you should port forward, you can just say Istio control experimental dashboard Kiali, and it will figure out all those ports for you and just do it. So should I make a work item to show that way, or do we like not using Istio control in the old-fashioned way?
I mean, our getting started guide goes through the effort of setting up the path for the users for Istio CTL. So I mean, I don't see why we don't use it. Let's use it. Unless there's some sort of pushback from people around not using Istio CTL for convenience tasks.
All right, I'll work with Frank on PR and see if we can get it in.
Yeah, so the only pushback I've heard from people is when Kubernetes has similar commands, Kubernetes can be used instead of Istio CTL, but if something unique to Istio CTL, I don't see why not.
Agree.
So Ed, since you go through 1.2, do you know there's a release note draft? I'll send you a link. If you can update the changes with Istio CTL, that would be really great. I already populated a few for you.
All right, I will update the release note. Good idea.
Thanks.
So for this meeting, Ram will be talking about the Istio user experience, how we think we can make it easier to get people up on Istio and deploy with Istio. And I will do my best to talk about what I saw at KubeCon EU. Probably the big thing that we should talk about but don't know how to talk about is SMI, and we should talk about what if we think Istio should be sort of with it, and on what end. So let's talk about that in the second half of the meeting. Ram, do you want to share your screen and share your slides, or do we have any other news items we should talk about for next week?
Well, if there's nothing else, I can share my stuff. You guys see my screen okay? PowerPoint?
Perfectly.
Cool. So for those who don't know me, my name is Ram Venom. I'm one of the product managers at IBM. I work on the IBM Cloud Kubernetes service and also Istio. And what I did today is I wanted to run through a list of kind of pain points that I've seen from users who have used Istio as part of their evaluation, POC, or production usage. My experience has been mostly around, running multiple Istio labs over the last 6 months to a year at KubeCon and other conferences. I talked to many customers as part of my day job, customers who've evaluated Istio or adopted it. And I've also worked with a lot of teams that go through this journey. So again, my goal is to kind of present these pain points to you guys and everybody else, and then see if we can use those to leverage, better work items and tackle them moving forward. I've broken apart the adoption phases into these phases, and I think it's kind of important to break these down because it helps you identify when you're building content, whether it's doc, tasks, or Istio, CTL, or even APIs, help you focus towards your user and where they are as part of this journey so that you're not adding unnecessary complexity. For example, things like a production usage knob into the installer instructions for getting started or the learn phases. It helps you kind of delineate your content and also understand the flow of the user and making sure that they're transitioning from one phase to another properly and where people are dropping off. There's obviously several personas, Kubernetes personas or CI/CD personas or developer personas when deploying applications to production clusters. But if I had to narrow it down to just two, then I would say in my experience it's been these two: the administrator, who's responsible for basically setting up the infrastructure, which includes the creation of the Kubernetes cluster and installing things like a service mesh on top of it, configuring it with various logging or monitoring sources. And once that's set up, they kind of hand it over to their dev teams, who sit kind of basically somewhere else that gets permission to access this cluster, and they're responsible for all tasks related to their application lifecycle, and that could involve any type of descriptor for what they expect out of a service mesh, and even if that means just describing their applications or even just applying the Istio policies themselves. So in that case, we need to understand where does Istio fit into here? What is our target persona? And there's going to be different journeys per persona. The administrator just might be the first half, the install and configure section, and then the app developer persona can start off with Istio on top of an existing cluster. Some feedback I got from the community, mostly Twitter, is, and we're seeing this a lot recently, is that Istio is hard to use. The API is difficult to understand. The install and the configuration is hard, and that there's no kind of a happy path, easy install route. But for whatever the reason, this is what we're seeing a lot recently. So did my best to kind of break all these pain points down into those phases, and then we'll kind of walk through them. For the Istio installation, there are multiple install methods, there's multiple profiles, there's multiple providers, and I think our doc tries to satisfy all of them in every page, right? For example, this getting started page, before even downloading Istio or the command to download the Istio files, we introduce the user to multi-cluster, we introduce them to mesh expansion, we talk about these multiple profiles, and there's always like these if statements and warnings and forks and gotcha messages. These all hurt user experience and make Istio appear to be more complex than it is, because if we're saying that for majority of the people the demo installation profile works fine, then we should take an opinionated approach and write a getting started page and use Istio CTL and whatever we have to tailor to those majority. And I don't think we do a good job of that. And once you install Istio, there's kind of no good confirmation that you have something up and running. We don't take you straight to a value add, like, here, launch this dashboard and you can see this happening, things like that. We just kind of drop you off with either a verify command or counting the number of CRDs. The configuration, after you've installed Istio, the docs, for you to accomplish some of the tasks, you need to go back and modify basically your install. And to do that, some of them are config maps and some of them are environment variable changes for the control plane pods. Some of them require you to restart some of the control plane pods. And these all add to complexity. There should be an easier way for you to enable and disable and what features you want without having to go through the Helm template install process or whatever journey you took to get to your current Istio cluster.
I agree 100%. And
Mm-hmm.
also, it's possible that the user who installed Istio is not the administrator who is running these steps, and there has to be a good way to let more than one person share in the task of administering and using Istio.
Mm-hmm. Right, and some of these we might be solving in the upcoming releases, whether it's with the Istio operator work or a different method. But I think from a user experience point of view, we still need to define this as a user requirement. And whether that gets implemented by another team, that doesn't matter, but we need to track that this use case is satisfied. Going to the next phase of the journey, when the user is learning the concepts of Istio, we have the concepts all documented in the concepts doc, but it's a very long document, and that's where we describe things like virtual services, destination rules, and how the architecture fits in. But it's a very long read, and most people do not consume or learn content that way. They don't just sit down and just read the whole doc as much as we want them to, right? Like a lot of people will just start playing with it, or they'll just jump straight to the tasks. And our tasks don't do a good job explaining the concepts. We kind of just tell you to go read the concepts page in its entirety, and I expect you to know those before you proceed with the task. And I think that in a lot of cases, a simple diagram in the task and concepts to help a user understand these concepts better can go a really long way. And even in the task, we have a lot of those if statements where we're having the user constantly make decisions or know details of their Istio installation to proceed. There's a lot of examples of this, but if you just search for if you're, for example, or look for the number of times we use tabs, or we have those info or warning boxes, you'll see that some of those problems. Tasks versus examples, that definitely causes confusion to some users. They go straight to examples, and then that's obviously not where we want them to go if they're just learning Istio. And this is where I grabbed launching dashboards should be simpler. So being able to launch Kiali, Grafana, et cetera, shouldn't be a long proxy command where you get the pod and get the port and everything. It should Istio-CTL or something should simplify that. The terminology and the nomenclature, I think this is something we all know. It's for whatever the reason, we have our API objects named this way, and it causes a lot of confusion with our users. And at every conference, at every presentation, I see the presenter describe these in a different way. And even in advanced presentations, they feel the need to kind of reteach the user some of these because they know that people forget exactly what they do and where they fit in. But I think from a UX point, we need to drive some simplification layer on top of this. And I know there's multiple ways of doing it, whether we add another layer on top, or whether we're renaming it, or it might just be a matter of better documentation. But regardless, I think this is a pain point, and it's not user friendly from an application developer point of view. When they get through the tasks, right, with book info, and they think they learned Istio concepts and the general flow, the next step is to adopt Istio for their own applications, right? Do we have a guide that walks them through the best practice for adopting Istio for their own applications? What should they do first? Should they enable automatic injection? Should they do it per app? What is the flow? And I don't think that exists, or if it exists, people are not finding it. Because I see issues all the time where they just enable automatic sidecar and then restart stuff, and then things are broken, and they're like, oh crap, installed Istio, now my app is broken, and it's just That's not the experience we kind of want them to go through. It's got to be incremental, and if it is, what is that experience? So that guide, I think, is missing. So for users that have adopted it, some of the pain points they hit is, this cryptic error messages like 503s, 504s, or no healthy upstream messages. What can we do to help a user debug these common errors better? I know we have various Istio debugging guides, and I'll get to some of that, but I think for these very common scenarios, there's just got to be something we can do to help with that. Most of those gotchas are documented in this like port name and service requirements doc, but again, people don't read that, and if you don't, then you don't know that you've made a mistake that's documented in this documentation. What can we do to identify that a user might be making this mistake and point them to the doc maybe, and maybe have that in the logs, or have that as part of Istio CTL to point them to these requirements so that they'll go read and implement it. A lot of questions, a lot of people ask us about, the problem is not their application, but it's the config around their application that they now have to migrate to Istio, and things like, if they already have like Nginx ingress and they're using Nginx rules and annotations, et cetera, like now they know that they have to move over to Istio's virtual services and destination rules. What is the migration guide for that? And there's a lot of activity in this Git repo, in this GitHub issue, that talks about these requirements, and a lot of responses from the community. Enabling security, in my experience, is the number one reason, the number one use case for customers to adopt Istio is they want, pod-to-pod encryption. So this should be dirt simple to implement, and currently it's not. I think it is error prone. And it's also one of those that causes those common 503 issues, and for the user, there's no easy way to debug what they did wrong. And when they go start debugging, this is where the complexity is exponentially grows, right? If they start reading Envoy logs, they're very noisy. When you apply an Istio config, Istio rules, there's no way for you to know that the rules were successfully applied, because there's no describe, like you would describe a Kubernetes resource and get a status message back that this rule is incomplete because it's waiting on something else, for example, a subset, or that this rule is invalid, or this rule broke the service mesh and now the mesh is frozen. There's no feedback. And to debug these, I know we have Istio CTL, proxy status, proxy config with listeners, clusters, routes, etc. But you have to be an Istio expert to be able to understand how to use these appropriately and compare, different configs and know what to look for. So I sure we can write more documentation on that, but I think some of those main use cases for these debuggings can be documented better, or maybe even automated. So things like if my pod A can't talk to pod B, is there just a Istio CTL check connection A, B, and then have it do some of these checks for me and give me back a list of things that it verified and found a potential problem. That's just a solution, but things like that are I think what people would kind of expect when they hit these type of issues. So those are all the pain points. And another thing that I wanted to capture is a desired experience. What is our end goal for someone who is adopting Istio? And I kind of tried to put, based on talking to a few of you, I put together this rough draft of what I think we should aim for. So as a user who wants to learn Istio, I want to be able to easily install Istio on top of an existing cluster that I already have. That cluster will most likely have applications. Installing Istio on that cluster should break nothing. I want to deploy a sample that comes from Istio. It should be a modern, good-looking a sample that represents my application, represents my architecture, or as close to it as possible. Once I deploy the sample, without having to do too much, I want some confirmation that Istio is working and I can get some value at. And that could be something as simple as launching a dashboard like Kiali to see traffic flow, for example. So deploy a sample, hit the run sample, and then see the various services and get that service graph. That's a nice confirmation. I want to do a high-value task, such as enabling mesh-wide mutual TLS. So that should be a simple command or of that sort. And I want to go back to my application and see that it's still working, and then and then go direct to the dashboard and see, maybe a little lock icon to show that, okay, now my stuff is encrypted. And a new user should be able to perform this task in under 2 minutes. And they need confirmation that, with each step that it was successful. There should be a single page where they can go through this experience and learn Istio. They should not jump you around to various pages for them to keep track of and potentially get lost in. It should be captured in one page, and ideally this demo should be recorded and shown on Istio, so that we don't have every single vendor and conference presenter basically wasting time putting together their own Istio demo to teach people what it is. And that people can learn Istio just for users that don't have the ability to run the task, for them to actually see it working in a blessed video that we put directly on Istio. So I think that's kind of the end of my ramble. So I'll stop there and kind of gain feedback from you guys and see what you think about converting some of these pain points into epics, what you think about this experience, et cetera.
I don't think it was a ramble at all. I think you organized it very well, and I think these are exactly the problems that we need to tackle. I think that almost every bullet point here deserves to be connected to an existing issue, or existing epic, or a new epic should be created to gather the issues about some of these things.
Great. Yeah.
As one of the new people in the Istio project, I can identify with almost every single one of these. Yeah, it took me a while to even understand exactly what is Istio. It took me a little while to kind of wrap my mind around it. And like you said, some of the examples, they take a while to kind of to work, and I like this idea of doing the getting started task in less than 2 minutes. That to me is a win if you can, get people up and running very quickly.
Great. Yeah, that's good confirmation.
I think so. There's also one thing that I noticed on the Docker website. They actually have a why Docker page, and so that may be something that we could look. Why do we need something like this? And maybe that could be something where you can kind of explain like the point of having something like Istio, because again, at first I had to just understand what it was before I could even install it and know what I'm installing. Why am I even doing this? So that could certainly help. And then, like you said, this would prevent other folks from generating their own why Istio presentations.
Sure.
Like you said, we're kind of controlling the narrative a bit. So
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, because
you and I have spoken separately. I think there's another persona, the SRE sort of persona, who is using Istio to keep his mesh up and to troubleshoot what's going wrong when his work fails. So that is a section that you or someone else should do more on to come up with what sort of roles that persona has, and to make sure the documentation is tailored towards that user.
Right, because that an SRE persona would kind of come in after they've adopted Istio, right? Like once they have it running in production, for example, and then I would think that that's where the SRE persona and their tasks would really shine.
I agree.
Okay.
we talked a lot about diagrams, and we have many, but they're far away from the YAML. My biggest frustration is that the YAML and the diagram that goes together are kept at the opposite ends of the concept page. But I was wondering about those diagrams. If people are going to be being pointed to Kiali or some of these other tools to visualize their mesh, should we consider dumping our pretty handcrafted diagrams and using something like Kiali? Having the user see one set of diagrams and then be told that they should use Kiali means like a translation of visual metaphor. What do we think about trying to recreate the diagrams that we use to explain our Istio rules with Kiali or with whatever tool we're recommending people to use in production?
It's kind of interesting. By the way, this is Dan. I had to dial in. I couldn't get audio to work in my computer. So our diagrams, some of which are conceptual and some of which illustrate the Istio components, Ed, are you basically saying redo those with a styling that matches that which they will see in Kiali?
I think that might help people not to have to translate in their head what they saw with what they're seeing live.
If you think the diagrams are difficult to understand, I thought that the diagrams that we created were fine. I just think we need more of them.
They're beautiful. I think they need to be near the YAML. So
Agree.
I'll look at them. I'll scroll down to the YAML, then I'll be like, which diagram was this? I'll have to go back. So yeah, we reorganize them. I think they're good, pretty diagrams. I have no trouble understanding our diagrams. Okay.
Yeah, hi, this is Lynn. I think next step probably would be categorize some of these issues, because I think a lot of them would go to the documentation work group. And then some of these we should looking into which work group might be able to help fix some of these, or maybe some of the work item already being addressed in different work group. I think that would be a good exercise to actually turn these into some of the work item in GitHub.
Right. I think from the beginning we knew that the UX group by itself won't have enough people to go solve all the UX problems. It's more meant to kind of lead, identify the problems, and then drive them across all the different working groups.
Right, exactly. We'll have to interact with different work groups to actually turn them into actionable items.
Right, that's what I wanted to get at. Thanks for bringing that up, Lynn. And Ron, by the way, I said this to Ron earlier. We spoke last week. I think this is fantastic work that very much needed to be done for a long time. So thank you. Yeah, so the environments, so a lot of stuff here is installation. I think that's the environments working group. I think we should get Ram on the agenda there to do this presentation. And then, yeah, for documentation. And that's the biggest thing. Is I want to impress on people how important this is, and I hope to get these groups to agree to take this on in the 1.3 timeframe.
Thank you, Ram.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So I'm going to try to share now some of my notes from KubeCon, which are oriented towards user experience. So I went to KubeCon last month. I met many of you there. So let me see if I can show you what I learned there and what I thought about things. So as part of the day before KubeCon started, IBM hosted an event to teach people how to use Istio. More than 3 people showed up. You can see this giant room. These people spent over 3 hours going through the guestbook demo, trying to do it. You can see Ram way back here and Lynn way back here to get an idea for how big this room was. When Ram is telling you about the problems he sees people having at these events, he's 100% for real on this. This is what it is like to teach people in a live setting sort of how to use Istio. That evening, we had a meetup organized by Dan Cerulli, who's on this call. Here's me talking about the performance of Envoy. And the most interesting talk for me was not any of the deep technical talks about how Istio works, but this by a local telecom user, Pablo Moncada. And I thought three of his slides were really good. Everyone should look at his whole presentation, but let me pull up his slide deck, which I thought was really interesting. So this is lessons for running Istio in production in Barcelona. This is a local Barcelona guy, Pablo Moncada. He had some very nice diagrams that teach sort of how Istio works and why you should use a mesh that we should be using to teach people about the mesh. But then at the end, he talked about his sort of pain points. And I think that would be worth addressing those in detail. The first one is Istio is easy to break by bad config. You see what happens. You'll see proxies going stale because two rules conflict. This is what Ron means when he says that the mesh seems to freeze. And Pablo's solution is that he's actually using Helm templates that he writes themselves to write Istio rules. So you'll generate Istio rules automatically to prevent all of the errors. And I actually had been working on something similar and have a PR that gives a Helm-like function for this with error checking that's not in Helm. Helm lets you do strings, and that's probably enough for most people. My PR takes it a little further, giving validation to the strings, like it's really a service name and stuff. I'm looking for some people to collaborate on taking that PR further and getting it merged. But he's telling people that they should be running proxy status, which we know is a low-level debugging command. He is telling people to increase the proxy verbosity and all this debugging stuff. And that's just because he had so many problems with conflicting rules making his pods go stale. So I think we should really address that. I've thought about that myself. I have some, what Ram said about having a status field in the rules and letting kube control describe work in Istio, I think would be a good start. And letting rules sort of go in provisionally until the envoys have all accepted them, I think would be another helpful thing. Anybody who wants to talk about that with me on a proposal for that, talk to me offline. He is a heavy use of this Grafana feature that I had not used before. If envoys reject the rules because they're inconsistent, you'll see these things happen here. These things can happen for all kinds of reasons, like it's discovery service not having a secret or these conflicting rules. So he's right away warning people that they should all be using this feature, which suggests we're not sort of doing a good job and having pilot % good data to Envoy. Or maybe we need to put PRs into Envoy to relax things in some cases. His top experiences were about gateway, port name uniqueness, this naming convention that Ram also mentioned, service entries on TCP ports, and one that I've never seen, but he hit a lot, was SSL certificates and these 404 errors. So I'm hoping that we can fix these. Most of these are networking issues, but I'm going to try to tag them as UX and try to get more attention on them.
Yeah, so these are issues that he already opened, right?
Some of them are opened by him. Some of them are just his complaints, and but he didn't open those issues. Some of those are 4-digit issues that are longstanding.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So for me, the biggest takeaway from KubeCon was this SMI announcement. Microsoft has their own service mesh. I'm going to call it an API without an implementation. I recommend that everyone sort of look at the announcement and watch this 8-minute video by Gabe Monroy to sort of see it. I have a screenshot for it. I'll show you in a moment. So they, instead of using, resources specific to your mesh, they want to have a common one. And they have all these partners. I think that it's a good idea in terms of things that build on top of the mesh, like analytics pieces. I think that's going to be great for customers. I'm nervous about sort of how this is going to play for places where Istio does something that other things don't, like say fault injection or different retrying stuff. It's going to be very tricky to convince people to use our stuff when there's this subset that's in this different language that they're used to. So I'm hoping that the TOC can come up with a better response on what I just said about what we should, how we should deal with this. So the documentation for it is at this site, smispec.io. When I looked 2 weeks ago, it didn't seem fleshed out. I listened to the Kubernetes podcast where Edith Levine talked about Superglue and how they're going to switch over and use these APIs. And that's worth listening to for everyone. And the whole, the Kubernetes podcast is great. This is a especially good episode. So here's a screenshot from the video that Microsoft showed at KubeCon. I have a zoom in on this later on, but they showed 3 screens like this. One for Istio showing canarying weighted traffic balancing, one with linker D and telemetry, and one with console. They showed sort of the same system working. So that's nice. Here is their actual sort of JSON that they use to control the system. I just typed this in from the screenshot because it was too hard to see. So they're sort of saying they're proposing this new object called SMISpec traffic split canary with a weight and services, and they're using Flagger to implement it. And this ran using Istio as well. So Flagger was sort of manipulating it. Istio was sort of making it happen. So anyway, it's worth checking out if you want to see how at least one company thinks the future of user interaction with service meshes are.
Depending on, I just want to interject one thing. I don't know exactly what it means when it says Superglue is going to rebase on these. I have heard them communicating privately that they basically wrote the SMI spec and gave it to Microsoft. I don't think that GitHub backs that up, but she made it sound like these were our APIs, like they are the Superglue APIs. I don't know if that's true or not, or if there are some changes that were made.
This conversation is being recorded, so I'm not going to speculate. On this podcast, she said that they were a year ahead of Microsoft because they've been working on it before. So if they're a year ahead,
right? I mean, that was Superglue's kind of value prop. Was we'll help you set up. We'll sit in front of any mesh, right?
Yeah. So that's the space here. We want to get a handle on it. If the world is going towards Superglue or SMI, we want to make sure we work well with it. If the world is not going there, we want to make sure that we have the right message.
Yeah, by the way, over the last weekend, I don't know if you guys see, there was a Twitter storm that talked about SMI between Tim Hawkins and Brandon, I forgot his last name, from Microsoft. He was one of the Kubernetes co-founders. And also Christian poster, Zach Tetre was also chiming in. Christian poster actually summarized the discussion as on his blog. So there was people talking about the least common demand LCD, the least common delimiter API for the new API, and how is it going to be helpful, how it's not going to be helpful. We're not having such an API for Kubernetes because we don't need them. So there was just another round of interesting discussion if people are interested.
Yeah, I engaged in a little bit and have decided to back off.
Oh, right. Then there's also pick it's still being Google dominated and all that too. You've probably seen that too.
Yeah.
Well, I am not convinced that we are dealing with honest actors here. I think that the criticisms, Google does have more PRs than anyone in Istio, but Google had a similar number. It's about 2/3 at this stage in Kubernetes lifetime as well. And when Brendan says things like SMI is much more like Kubernetes than Istio, he's really saying because Istio is not a multi-cloud thing. He's saying Istio is for a particular. He's essentially saying it's a particular cloud. It is almost as if it is not open source, and it's completely disingenuous. And I don't know that it's worth having a debate. Our marketing team, when I did talk to them, their feeling about SMI was there's no reason to talk about it. I'm not convinced that's correct. Yeah, but I don't know what the ideal strategy here is. I think that the issue that I have, I think that finding, as pursuant to what Ram was saying earlier, getting good usability in APIs is absolutely worth pursuing. That's a great thing to do.
Yes, because that's essentially why they introduced SMI.
So they say. I'm not actually sure that's correct. And I think that had they really wanted to get an industry-wide effort at this, they would have involved us from the beginning, right? I don't think you were involved in the API design, were you, or offered? Were you, Lynn?
Well, I know they try to include us. I think before the announcement, probably not at the very early stage.
No, that's the thing. I think they did the same for us for the announcement. They notified someone here that the announcement was happening. That's very different than saying, hey, as an industry, we'd like to get together. And so what they did was they get everybody who's not IBM and Google and say, hey, let's get together and do this. That in itself is pretty interesting. It's an interesting choice.
Yeah, from different podcasts between William Morgan and Edith, I feel like Solo and also LinkedIn probably were with them at the beginning, and then the rest were kind of offered before the announcement.
Right. So anyway, my big point is I think that having good APIs is a good idea. I think that having a consistent API no matter where you are is also very good. I don't know. I think the SMI kind of takes for granted that people will want to run different control planes, different places, and therefore they need a common API among them. I think that's pretty suspect, and that's the biggest issue I have is that it seems to assume that everyone will want to run a different control plane everywhere they run. And I think that's probably not likely, that people will probably want the same control plane everywhere. And that's the biggest thing is that I don't buy the premise that people will be using a different control plane everywhere. And in fact,
I think it comes to whether it has a clear winner. If you look at the container orchestration system a few years back, when you don't know the winner, you will see people actually running different container orchestration implementation across different clouds. But once there is a clear winner, then you would get more cloud provider to adopt it. Then it's no longer going to be needed for stuff like SMI.
Right, that's a good point. And in fact, I think SMI is real. I think it's possible. What they're trying to do is prevent there from being a real winner.
Right, exactly.
Because right now there's only one that could be, right. And I think that the other vendors who are in there probably aren't thinking we're going to be the one. And so they're just trying to prevent there from being a one. And in reality, I wish that companies would find better ways if people are trying to differentiate on the wrong things, I think.
Yeah, I think when I talk to the solo team, I think they kind of believe Istio is the winner. It's just they want to, I mean, they're not solely in Istio camps, and they want to support everything out there. So to them, that's interesting to build something on top of all that. But they did say, if the winner is defined, they would just move some of their stuff to be based on Istio.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, everybody, that's. I think we should move on from SMI. Although I don't have much more. These are sort of the other Istio talks I saw at the KubeCon. The other talks that I thought were interesting or were especially interesting to me was the Linkerd talk, which was very deep dive. The WebAssembly talk, because that might be coming to Envoy, and also this native experience of CRDs, which did not have the Kube Control Explain content I'd wanted, but shows a lot about how the validation of CRDs is going to be handled by Kubernetes.
All righty.
So yeah, so I did that. So we had this sort of failed meeting 2 weeks ago because it fell off the calendar, and I noticed we have a lot less people on this meeting, so we got to get people to sort of resubscribe to this meeting. We had briefly talked about some of these same issues sort of last time. And I never got a good answer about the new installer. Is that going to be in 1.2 or 1.3?
So we just decided that we're not going to have it in 1.2 because lack of resources and the timeline. So if you go to istio.io, there's no mentioning of the new installer at all.
Okay. We talked about all the problems of sort of as part of Ram's thing. I started doing them a little deeper here. Something that I want to do really badly is to try to get a handle on if the changes that we're making to Istio that are supposed to make Istio more compatible and easier to use for different workloads are actually working. So we have lots of tests to verify that we don't have regressions. So the networking tests will, do book info and make sure that it still works and this sort of thing. But there's a lot of things that just don't yet work with Istio. I tried to install Cockroach DB this morning. It didn't work. I was going through the list of all the stateful set middleware that doesn't work with Istio, and you can sort of put annotations on it and try to get it in namespaces that aren't injected and use and not get the telemetry. And we have work items to fix some of these problems. And so some of these things like stateful sets are being slowly fixed. And what I'd like to see is a way of measuring if we're getting closer or further from these goals. So if we could identify a couple dozen apps that we think our users want to use that maybe half work with Istio now and half don't, if we could see if that number of apps that just work goes up and down, I think that would be sort of good. So that's something that I'm doing sort of on the side of the UX work to measure our improvements.
Would it be interesting to try and determine what the demand is for them? Like if we had a list and we just sent out a survey, would that be useful?
I would like to see it, yeah. I'd like to see a survey for demand. And I'd like when something doesn't work, not just to say don't work, but to sort of say why. So is it not working because it expects networking to be up. Well, we have an issue for that. Is it not working because we expect port naming? Well, we have an issue for that. Is it not working because it's a stateful set and it's not listening right, or it's doing direct pod IPs? It would be wonderful to have not only a list of what's popular, but have a list of the things that aren't working. Which issues should be prioritized because they bring the most new apps into the fold?
Right. So for the finding out the kind of demand, I think we could do a survey, and then maybe based on the results of the survey and finding out which workloads are important to people, then we could see if we could get volunteers perhaps to kind of provide some details with each about what's wrong.
Yeah.
Two different exercises, right? 2 phases at least.
I'm also thinking of making an epic of just like apps that don't work. Right now we have epics, like we have the stateful set epic, and then it has children, like Cassandra doesn't work, or this sort of thing. It might be good to have, here's a list of apps that we know don't work, and list what the reasons are, so that users can just search for their app on our issues and see if it's sort of a known one and they don't bang their head against it. And sometimes it's also the things like port naming, which is easy to fix. Like they just installed some Helm chart. They didn't know they were supposed to hand edit the results of the Helm chart, and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly part of it if we're able to improve the getting started experience and the ability of Istio to tell you, hey, there's a problem with your YAML because you don't have a port name that's right. Or even better, just behave properly despite that. It might fix some of those things, right?
Right. So we're working on so many different fronts. Iris is working on a validation tool that's going to tell you about things like port naming. We want it to just work. We want, if it doesn't work, people to be led towards the solution. We want there to be some kind of run book to give somebody the like top level guidance on how to diagnose and find these things.
So the port naming, is that the declare protocol, or is that declare the container port number?
So I guess both. You have to say that there's a port, otherwise you get that listener problem, and you might have to say the port is HTTP, so that it knows that it's HTTP and knows that you can apply the level 7 rules to it.
Okay, yeah, I think that's great to have it in Istio CTL as an additional check. Just so you know, the network team is working on protocol splitting, where they would try to detect the protocol based on the traffic. But then on top of that, there's going to be also a support. What if you want performance optimization, where you don't want the protocol sniffing, you'd rather let Istio know this is the protocol I'm going to use to reduce that overhead. So, I mean, there's going to be a need for people even leverage that down the road, even though the protocol declaring becomes unnecessary.
It's totally true. And earlier on, I was thinking we needed more stuff.
John, how's it going?
Earlier stuff, I was thinking we needed stuff to validate stuff like Istio Vet does to give people suggestions. But what I realized was that it's really hard to create rules that simulate what the pilot is going to do, and pilot keeps improving. So things are less necessary. So what I'm looking for are ways that without writing rules, we can figure out the problem. Like if Envoy is rejecting configuration from pilot, can we improve that so that it sort of learns why and puts that in a status field, and then we can know how to create defects for it. So right now it's just too hard to write these validators that we're trying to write. So that's what we do for this week. Does anyone want to talk about anything for next week? I want to make sure I get the right people on the agenda. We talked great deal about SMI, so we may not need to talk about that next week, but or in 2 weeks. Do we have any volunteers? Hopefully, I'll be able to present some preliminary results on what works and what doesn't, and I'll be able to talk about the things we've created around Ram's slide deck.
Yeah, I think by that point we should have a list of epics and their sub-child tasks and have some sort of prioritization. So we should be able to start assigning them to people.
I'd like to start making epics for your bullets even before you show this at the environments group, but I'll start with the
Yeah, let's do it.
I'll start with the back of the deck first and move forward, so that way if they want to do those epics themselves, they can. Okay, well, thanks everyone.
Hey, before you leave, is there a link to this KubeCon EU highlights? Did I miss that?
I don't think I gave it. I think it's on my personal thing, and I can't remember if I shared this link or not. But I see no reason people can't just view that. I'll put that in the UX Slack channel. How's that sound?
Okay, great.
Thank you.
All right, thanks everyone.
Okay, bye.
Thanks, and thank you, Ram. Bye now.